Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor. Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show. Today, bringing you another really awesome guest involved in, I'll refer to as sort of the bleeding edge of science and technology, ultimately creating a better tomorrow in the biomedical space and beyond it, actually, for all of us. Today, we have the honor of being joined on the show by Dr. Thomas Ehmer, who is a seasoned technology strategist. He has over 2 decades of experience in information technology innovation, in business development, in research and development within the pharmaceutical industry. And he is also co-founder of the Quantum Interest Group at Merck KGaA Darmstadt, Germany. Dr. Ehmer is, involved in scouting really unique, emerging, and disruptive technologies for the organization, ultimately demonstrating their potential for R&D applications, specifically with a focus on quantum technologies. And throughout his career, he's played a really pivotal role in the organization in shaping IT strategy in terms of business process optimization, digital transformation across the entire pharmaceutical value chain, as well as focusing on areas like transparency of AI and ultimately how and where emerging technologies ultimately lead us and help patients live better lives. His expertise spans technology scouting, business analysis, IT program leadership, and has definitely driven many major global projects in these areas. Before his corporate career, Dr. Ehmer was an active private seed investor, contributed to quantum computing research and applications in drug discovery, authoring various publications on the potential of quantum computing, as well as machine learning and pharmaceutical R&D. He holds a Ph.D. in physics, biophysics, and physiology from Heidelberg University, continues to mentor within the German Physical Society, and his approaches, as combined with his expertise, have earned him many innovation awards over the years, as he really has been very influential in bridging this gap between emerging tech and real world applications. So very excited about this episode and what we're going to be getting into. Honor to have him. Dr. Thomas Ehmer, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today.
Yeah, thanks, Ira. So it's really a pleasure to be on the show, and I would like to love to learn this guy that you just introduced. It's kind of a mouthful. So really, thanks for having me. It's
absolutely. Cool. Absolutely. And I'm looking forward to learning a lot about him too, and all things quantum. And I promise, while this is a little bit out of my comfort zone, I will try to hang in there with you as much as possible when we get to some of the more esoteric concepts. But nonetheless, Thomas, I would love to start off at the beginning, as we typically do. As mentioned, you studied physics, biophysics. Your dissertation was in this fascinating area of membrane potentials and calcium depletion. And all sorts of cool things, which are very hot nowadays, actually coming sort of full circle in this convergent realm of biotech and biophysics and all things. Take us back to the beginning. Tell us your early story, if you would.
Yeah, so it's. I think you mentioned a good part. So it's always happening in circles. So I was starting doing physics in University of Karlsruhe, and then because they are really good in theoretical solid state physics and stuff, and I was more coming from a medical background from my family. I was trying to tipping my toes into the medical physics and nuclear medicine stuff. So there is another university in Kaiserslautern, also in Germany, that you could do remote studies. So I did my medical physics and stuff there, and then a good friend of mine decided that he wants to do astronomy. So we just took a ride to 60 kilometers north from Karlsruhe to Heidelberg. And so I was just riding along and I discovered that they have a so-called biophysics unit. So this was my friend Thorsten Antoni, and he introduced me then just to the faculty. And I was doing a tour on campus, met then Christoph Kremer, who was busy looking at confocal microscopy and doing two-photon stuff. And he has had a really cool laser where he was focusing the laser to produce a plasma. So it was a plasma ball. So I found this quite cool. And I asked if I can do diploma at Heidelberg, and they say, yes, you can, but you need to switch. So welcome to administration. So I had to switch over to Karlsruhe, and then so he stayed in Karlsruhe, but I switched over. And then in these lessons of the biophysics, we had a partnership. They had a partnership with the medical faculty, and one of these, who my later Dr. Vater Rainer Fink, he was trying to continue a paper that he started 20 years ago or so back then. So it was now 40 years ago that they started this paper. And asked to somebody speaking Fortran 77. So Fortran 77, for those guys who are maybe younger, this is a very old computer language. And I said yes, because I had learned it for whatever reasons. So, and then this landed up in doing a diploma thesis on electrophysiological computational solving of differential equations. And the fun part was that back then we had no GPT, we had no pip install. So you had to really do the stuff yourself. So I worked translating the stuff into Turbo Pascal, something I would not do any longer today. But anyhow. And then we run this on a high computer thing. And basically, I think this was the start dipping my toes more deeply as a fundamental coaching into computational physics, which landed me then even switching over to doing my PhD in computer simulation of electrophysiology and doing also then some experiments. So a colleague of mine killed the frogs and we measured these things, the muscles. Mm-hmm. Also we reused the animals that have been used for the medical faculty to train preparing them. Mm-hmm. So when they did their animal studies, we did the recycling and we took the toes. It's really tiny. And then we were preparing the toes under the microscope and doing electrophysiological experiments. And all those guys back then, they are still in academia or have startups in the biophysics field. So I dropped the topic because during the PhD, I was happy and lucky enough to get a sponsorship from the German Federal Research Foundation. So I think it's translated as a research training group, or however. And this was cross disciplines. Mm-hmm. So it was chemical medicine, physics, and the physicists are always a bit exotic. And back then, this was the times before social media. So we had time to spend the nights to spend not only drinking, but also to do some philosophical discussions about foundations of physics and all things, and looking from different perspectives. Mm. And then, I mean, the chemist and the physicist and the biologist, everybody had their idea of what is life. And we came up with this concept of there should be something more than just physics, or maybe there is biofield. I mean, I guess listeners from this episode are aware of these theories, or Shamini Jain, for example. And also we discussed quite intensely, interestingly enough, what is a placebo? Yep. So which means my interpretation, or not only my interpretation, but the one I'm taking up, is the bridge between traditional Eastern medicine and placebo, meaning in principle the transaction, the activation of self-healing and the transactional thing. So this is about stuff we are going to discuss. But on the other hand, of course, we were physicists, so we are also going deep into the techniques. And in the lab, we did some two-photon excitation things with the weak laser. And my professor was quite visionary. And so we had always danced the dance between high tech and philosophy, and then boiling it down. And my Dr. Father Rainer, I think he is physiology and medical biophysics. And what he said, and I'm really grateful to him, is that we should reproduce the stuff. So it's not only just buying the machinery and the equipment, etc., but because of no budget, we had to build the stuff ourselves and
Yep.
walking in the path of those who discovered to get familiar with the method, which is sometimes a bit unnerving, of course, when you struggle for weeks and then in the end he comes up with a, I could have told you that. But in the end, I think it was a very good training to give a bit of stamina to not give up when you have a passion
Yeah.
and yeah, and go on. And I think I also need to mention my yeah, the support of pragmatic people who
Yep.
helped me out. So I always have whatever, for whatever reasons, a very good support network. So I can do what I can do because I have this people who say, oh, don't let him fall, just let him go on. And also my other doctor father, he was the dean back then at the pharmaceutical industry, pharmaceutical faculty, and it was not so easy to navigate this because medicine is very strict. And then if you do a PhD in medicine, you cannot just do a PhD in normal PhD, but you should have an MD. But I was not an MD, so it was kind of complicated. And then he just said a thing about leadership, very pragmatic, and then he just said, well, I am the dean. I make the rules. I take the decision. So if there is no rule, I make a rule for you. So I think this was kind of shaping also how I act as a mentor later.
Sure.
Maybe we talk about this a bit. And then the big change came, or so many words, when I did an internship, because in this yeah in this educational phase, there was a mandatory internship to get people from academia at least exposed once in their life to industry. And I choose Merck KGaA Darmstadt, Germany. uh, and started in business development and in the early phase of tech scouting and business process redesign, etc., as a
Mhm.
young talent. And my boss back then, Klaus Hönneknövel, he said, you're going to work on jobs that you're clearly underqualified. You make errors, you analyze them, you don't make them again, but here you go in order to grow quick. So he's the other guy who was mentoring him. And also he was really instrumental to always say business is people, stay human, don't confuse your role, your title with what makes you as a human. So they don't fly you first class because you're Thomas, but they fly you first class because you're the CEO. I'm
Yeah.
not. Lucky enough, I'm not the CEO. I don't have to take these responsibilities. Yeah, and then in that in that thing, I think when we did Merck just building the bridge, what I'm currently doing now, we had a lot of stuff in the early phases where I joined the IT department. Then back we were piloting things like natural language processing, statistical analysis of word correlations. I think that's mainly what today is resurfacing with these things. So we were looking at kind of a predecessor maybe of ontology, semantic correlations, etc., etc. And then back then nanotech was very hot,
Oh yeah.
and I worked quite a lot at IT consultant and IT project lead. And just to, as I mentioned, this mentorship. So I was kind of impressed that if you have good mentors, you can walk away that you currently would not have known. So I'm in a private capacity since I think 10 or 12 years now, a member, as you mentioned, for the German Physics Society, and also just
Mhm.
helping people out in these days between master, PhD, post PhD, and I stay on top what they are doing. That's kind of cool. So I'm
Mhm. Excellent.
long story.
No, no, no. It's again, it's a. I love hearing where people began and how again you transition that into this, and you've been doing this for over 2 decades now. Thinking about technology and science and innovation,
Hmm.
working sort of a internal incubator for every no much more than say we normally think about the pharma industry and sort of drug discovery and then licensing compounds, but you do a lot more than that, everything from discovery to biobanking. You've been involved in supply chain, medical
Hmm.
affairs. So I mean rather comprehensive list of areas. Now about 8 years ago, someone called, you get a phone call or someone emails you, I don't, somebody tells the story. They say, "Hey, Thomas, we're setting up a quantum task force. to explore this new area and how it ultimately is going to impact our business. You're going to lead it. So go do this. Tell us a little of the history of
Yeah,
what happened.
kind of. So I think first of all, yes. So let me just mention one thing on the Innovators Challenge, because bringing disruptive technologies into a company that is maybe 5 times as old as I am, or more, 7 times.
Right.
Yeah, I think that the challenge is really you are at the forefront. You cannot introduce products, so you just produce ideas, and the ideas are at or beyond the edge of craziness. And then you tell those 3% that might understand them. And then the challenge is, if I explain this to normal people who have normal business to run, they just can't. I mean, why should they care? And I think this is really something that took me quite a long time to accept, that it's not because they are stupid or I am too intelligent or I can't explain or whatever. It's just it's not their scope. So I think then this shaped also the way we construct these task force, because it was 3 people of us. By accident we met it, or by destiny or whatever. we met each other, and then we said, okay, let us analyze the topic, board on other people who are rather wide early adopters, and they can explain the majority. So I think, and then it's a bit like ants. Yeah, so you step out of the foot line, look, might there be something? If there is, let's go. If it's worthwhile, if not, you just go back in line. And I think just to mention this, in average, looking back now, I'm 25 years at Merck, so I think in average, I was 3 to 4 or 5 years too early, even for the early adopters. And then it's always good if you have friends who are similar. And then, and 8 to 10 years earlier than the majority. So we started this task force, as you said, I think 10 years or 8 years or 9 years ago. And yeah, how come? So it was really yeah, a kind of self-empowerment, because we were looking at novel technologies, and I mean it started from my side. It started the moment when we had in my, well, maybe one step back. In my role, when I was doing all this project management, IT project management, it was getting a bit boring, and I had a bit of an insight. So it was these days when we had children, and I had to started deep meditation and stuff like this. And then I had a kind of an insight that it's maybe not everything. So I found my purpose. So it's not worth for me to get up every morning just to go there to do IT project, because why should I go there every 60 kilometers per day? Maybe there's more to life than that. And then I came up with the idea we need to do some technology for the patients. I guess I'm not the only one who came up with the idea, but at least I pushed it. And I even had a personal empowerment back then from our CEO, Belen, when she was still in healthcare. And I was saying, yeah, I'm not a leader, but I think we should do this and da 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 da. And then she said, of course you're a leader, because otherwise you would not speak up and drive the topic. So I said, okay, let's go with that. And then we explored. I had some interns, and we explored. And one guy came and said, what can I do? I said, you can do wearables or artificial intelligence, back then not so hyped, or you can do quantum computing. He said, yeah. I said, no, you don't want to do quantum computing, because he was no physicist. And then, I mean, this is how he started. So we started with what is a qubit and all these things. And back then, the other co-founder joined Merck, or was there, but at least we got to connect with each other. Philipp Habach, he was a quantum chemist. He did his PhD in quantum chemistry. So he's doing quantum chemistry without a quantum computer. And then we had our ventures branch, M Ventures. They were also looking to invest into some quantum things, and then it happened. So we talked to each other, and then came this moment of synchronicity or whatever, and we just worked on the topic, on this quantum thing. I mean, I did start also a lot of other stuff, and maybe one other thing to share is, because it was hard for me to understand, and I'm trying to teach this to my children, is when you are a tech scout, and you identify a topic, it might be the hottest shit and really the coolest thing, but and we did some grassroots topics, neuromorphic, for example, or
Sure.
electroceuticals in a very early phase. And then at the moment in time, when those other 50% pick up, 15% pick up, I think it's really important to hand over to people who are able and capable and willing to drive this further. Because when I'm scouting, I just can't take care of operations. And it's really important to hand over and
Yeah.
just let go. And even if they become famous and we not, so that's it. I mean, that's life. Because
Right.
and I think that's for example, in this neuromorphic thing, we are still scouting, but for electroceuticals, I think like I can tell this that we have a quite a successful part of our future business R&D with the approach to targeted vagus stimulation.
Hmm.
So I think this is really interesting, and I'm really happy that those guys picked it up, and yeah, so
Yeah,
yeah.
I love examples like that,
Mm,
especially electroceuticals, just because well,
mm,
obviously it's sort of where you start out in the sense, in the biophysics
mm,
of all that stuff. But the fact that these themes that were unheard of, let's say, in pharma 10 years ago, but
mm,
you're gonna zap somebody, whatever, whatever that's the childish terminology. I talk about electricity with my kids. Say, oh yeah, you're gonna zap them and kill cancer,
yes.
whatever. But yeah, no, it's interesting. And again, that point about letting go, and well, these things have a life of their own, and they have to evolve in a very
Mm,
complex system. But no, no, I appreciate that point. Um, let's um let's transition into and I don't, Thomas, I don't need you to give us a lecture, a very long lecture. I know this could probably take hours, but we've touched a little bit, on quantum computing
yeah.
on previous episodes. Nothing really, dissertation level, but we've
Yeah.
talked
Yeah.
a little bit about, okay, there's these normal computers that use bits.
Mhm,
There's this new type of computer that's going to use this thing called qubits that take advantage of all potential states of these subatomic particles, and hence
mm.
can do many things at once that traditional computers may not. Um, Reintroduce our audience to quantum computing, and take your time as much as you want. And
Exactly.
then a topic that we
Grab a
have
coffee.
that a component of that, which I know you're passionate about, and I love you to go into, which we have not talked that much about, but really is sort of the secret sauce of what's the quantum computer is doing, is this whole
Mm,
principle of quantum sensing.
mm,
That in
mm,
in this unique quantum phenomena that comes out, the superposition and entanglement and all these fancy words that I'm not going to say anymore, just because I sound like an idiot. We are able to measure fields. You mentioned fields before: electric field, magnetic field, time, whatever the case may be. It's such a precision and sensitivity that may not have been thought about just a few years ago.
mm,
This is all
mm.
very important as we get into what the applications are, but take a little time with both quantum computing and specifically quantum sensing.
Yes, that's good. Yeah, cool. Yeah, thanks that you bring this up because I think sometimes so quantum technology, when we have quantum technology since years, you have the laser, you have a computer, so they work with quantum technology. So without it, it would not work. But I mean, we had even pitched, oh God, a few years back, really few years, many years back. Um, Back then, as when we have still been a task force, should Merck come up? Should we play in quantum or not? And if so, is it sensing or is it materials or is it applications or what is it? We even pitched this to our CEO back then, Oshman. He was super supportive and he had no idea what what this is about. And then, I mean, this resulted in in this task force where maybe we can talk later about how this is operating or not. But to the, let's say, top line introduction. So I could make the easy way and say 2 years back, my good friend Gopal Karamor, who was back then at Novo Nordisk and now is at IBM, he was asked by a guy uh, to write an article on quantum computing for an upcoming Wiley book, Computational Drug Discovery. And he said, "What
Mm-hmm.
should we do?" I said, "Of course we do it." I was a bit stupid because it's not easy writing a book article. So it's really wow, fantastic what this is. And we asked some usual suspects, but nobody had really the capacity. I think they knew what it means. So we started two or three of us with Hans Melo, and yeah, it's called the quantum computing paradigm. So if you want to link it, it's a Wiley book,
Mm-hmm.
and we try to introduce those unfamiliar with quantum computing, but familiar with drug discovery or what have you, to the mechanism, and not reinventing quantum chemistry, because, as I said, quantum chemistry you can do without quantum computers. So good. But I don't tell you this. So I walk you through a bit the quantum things. So so mainly there are two challenges. So first of all, we started with what is the challenge to introduce quantum computing at all. So I did supervise a MBA study. And then we detected that there are mainly three things, and I always like to use these three things. So on the one hand, we have this technical maturity. So what is a qubit? What is a quantum computer? I think I will tell you something about this. Then the second part is all this organizational acceptance and embedding this as added value in operations, which is mainly true for all novel technology, but not invented here. I don't have time, go away. My business runs better without you, blah, blah. And for quantum, we have this famous quote: if you think you understood quantum, you didn't.
Right.
Is maybe a bit, yeah. I don't like the quote too much, but I would always say it's different. And it's really a different cognitive paradigm, because like back then when Einstein was introducing everything is relative, quantum has other, call it properties or features. And I think these days we still lack quantum literacy. And this is why I'm always trying to explain this also to kids, because they are not yet brainwashed. And they live still in the universe, and they have more playfulness. And I think we need these generations to come up with making features of quantum. So what is features of quantum? So of course you have different philosophical interpretations of the quantum mechanics itself. So there is this famous Copenhagen interpretation of the collapse of the wave function. Then there is the multi-worlds idea. Then there is this transactional. So there are, I think, I know of 13. I'm a big fan of one. But I think the interesting part is to identify systems in life that could behave with quantum properties, but which are not quantum systems itself. And this is, I think, something that I find fascinating to explain this quantumness, or at least the principle of quantum, to people who have no clue, and or why should they? And so very often it's just quantum mechanics was hidden behind mathematics, and then you just see something and then shut up and calculate, and you see matrices, which is a table of numbers and what have you, and you just don't know why. It's different because you just don't do operations, but you apply an operator, and depending on which sequence you apply it, you get different results. So I always say it's a difference if you first open the window and then go out, or if you first go out and then open the window. So this is the permutation of the operatives. But I try to come up with a thing which is explaining quasi-particles, because in quantum you can also describe systems like quasi-particles, and I mean everybody knows the la ola in the stadium. And if you know this, how this la ola develops, it's some people standing there making, oh, this is the construction operator, and then oh, hey, and then you have the construction operator applied to the first phase from 0 to 1, so to say, and then the wave travels, and then you have, I don't know, you have a phase velocity, how quick does it travel, or the direction, and what have you. So I think this is something like a kind of quasi-particle. I'm not so sure if it's fulfilling all qualities, but at least it's more than it's more, a system behaves different than every individual. So this is what we call it as a quasi-particle, and I think this is what I use to say thinking sideways, yeah, and to explain could we have quantum properties in living systems that are not based on individual quantum effects.
Right.
So that's it. I think we want to go. I don't know if we want to dive into the two different sides of dancing with quantum. So you have the quantum systems itself, and on the other hand, we have the more monistic view, like what is the interpretation of this, or we are all one, etc. So I'm not sure if we want to go there. Maybe it's a bit early for the day, but but the idea is eventually we only can take statements about the way we observe the world
Right.
which is not necessarily the underlying reality, but yeah, okay. I mean, this could even explain placebo or whatever, but let's not go there. Let's go maybe
Right.
first into the into the tech. So quantum has, as it says, quantum is discrete quanta. So you have different energy levels. So which means you have a ground state and you have an excited state or multiple excited states. And the transaction between these is like giving money. So you have either $1 or $0 or €1 to 0, and you can only give a cent minimum. So there is no half cent. And this means that apparently nature is working this way. So we have either spin, which is in zero state up down, or we have atom, which is natural state or excited. And then when these electrons jump, they emit photons, which are then particles, carriers of energy. And these carriers of energy you can translate as your basic states of qubit. So you could say I am dark, which is 0, or I am excited, and then I'm 1, or I'm radioactive, potential to radiate, I'm excited, or I did radiate, I'm no longer excited. So these are these states. So and the transaction is always at random. So we can describe the transaction of the atomic decay with the statistics. So you can say uranium, what have you, has a half-life of in 200 years, half of the uranium is decayed. I'm making up the figures, so sorry, I'm not prepared for the details. But in principle, this is what the mass is doing, but you cannot tell the exact moment in time when one single atom is decaying. So this is the indeterminism, and I think this is for me, this is the fundamental unclarity where all these things come from, because things behave as a statistic, you can describe it. As an individual, they adhere to the statistics, but you don't know why. So this means we have to get rid of this local reality. So I cannot describe a photon, but I can describe a billion photons.
Right.
And I mean, this is really interesting. And then you can prepare your systems to say, now I have a ground state of, I don't know, ions or what have you, or virtual qubits. I put them everything in the ground state. I put half of them statistically in excited state. And then I have this kind of a superposition. So I know that 50% are here and the other 50% are there, but I don't know what. And because I don't know which ones, these superpositions, I have to treat them as a probability. And when I measure these, I get 50% in 1 and 50% in 0, but I have to measure. And once I measure, they are no longer this magic state. So they are no longer either or, or not either or, but I can no longer say they are 50-50, but I say they are definitely here or definitely there. And now in quantum computing, and also in sensing, but in computing, we specifically want to make the fact that now if we introduce a second qubit, we can say dependent on the state of the first qubit. So if it's 0, I don't switch, and if it's 1, I switch. So this is a so-called controlled knot, so a C knot. So depending on the first qubit, I switch the second one. And this is where we introduce entanglement. And with entanglement, then you can do whatever, exactly a lot of things. So the power of these, what they call massive parallel computations, comes from entanglement. And then the question is, of course, how do you describe your classical algorithms that you make use of these entanglement? And there comes the other magic, which is that I told about probabilities, but in the end, what is the physical, at least one idea of physical interpretation, is that we have potentialities. So quantum mechanics is not dealing with probabilities direct, but a quantum particle has the potential to be in a certain state. And only when I measure it, I apply a measurement thing, and then I multiply these potential with other potential, and I then get a number, a real number. And this real number is interesting because the potential is in mathematical terms a complex number, which means if you multiply two complex numbers, you can get a negative probability, which is
Okay.
so the probability that I get rich is negative, which means it's even worse than zero.
Right,
So,
right.
so and
Okay.
by this you can build some interesting parts, which is called interference. So this is what happens, for example, at the two-photon experiment when you say it's going here, it's going here, and in one moment in time it's behaving like a wave.
Right.
So you see a wave pattern, and this wave pattern is really coming from this from this negative probabilities. And what you want to do, one picture I used in the past is it's a bit like an oracle, so or like so you translate. Somebody comes with a problem, you say, "Oh, I'm doing some magic. I'm ex I'm putting the solutions on the border of a lake." And then I throw some stones in the pond and let it interfere. And wherever the maximum peak is, this is your solution. And this is the way how they build some very famous algorithms. So the most famous algorithm is a part of it is based on these phase amplitude stuff. And now the question is, what are you going to do with that? So if I go
Right.
with this to my colleagues and say, hey, I have a pond throwing stone algorithm that helps you finding a spot where your solution could be, they say, yeah, Thomas, else? What did you have for breakfast? And
Right.
um, I think this is really very tough how you make these quantum features a useful algorithm. So there are people like Shor or Grover, who Shor got the Fields Medal, so the Nobel Prize in Mathematics for that. And then, I mean, what could you solve with these? So, and I think this brings then to maybe to the idea what can we do with quantum algorithms. So I think
Absolutely.
that's one thing. I
Absolutely.
think we,
And
we can talk with sensors. I don't know if you want to go rather this route and we pick up the sensors later. Maybe
yeah,
might
no,
flow better in it. Yeah.
yeah, we'll pick them up in a little bit. I think, but I think,
Mm.
again, for the audience is when, when not to to sum up everything you said in one second, but basically the ability with quantum sensing and these tools to detect these extremely subtle changes in
Yeah.
biology and chemical systems leads to a tremendous amount of opportunities in everything from imaging to diagnostics to screening
Yeah.
drugs.
So there are two things. So there is as I mentioned, maybe I skipped that. So when you work with these superpositions,
Mhm.
um, you must not measure, because if you measure,
Yeah.
the collapse happens. So you open the box, the cat is dead or alive, if somebody wants to open the Schrödinger's paradigm.
Yep.
This means when I'm wanting to do my quantum calculations, I must not look. So this is super complicated. This is why it's so tough to have quantum computers, why it's so complicated to build error correction, because one thing I didn't mention is in quantum, you cannot just do error correction because you cannot copy quantum information.
Okay.
So there is no copy paste.
Right.
And once, if you do these classical algorithms, like a classical operation AND, for example, which is 0, 0 is, yeah, is or an OR operation, which is reducing 2 bits to 1 bit. So you cannot, if you have the 1 bit, so if you have the output, you cannot interfere the input. And in quantum, this is impossible, which makes it complicated. So this is for quantum computing.
Hmm.
This weakness is a super strength for sensors, because exactly instead of avoiding and protecting against the environment, we say, wow, this is so cool, because if we have the spin, this can be a very, very, very extremely subtle magnetic sensor. And then we
Okay.
can use these sensors to measure magnet fields.
Yep.
And biggest application is, I think it was in the press, Bosch, for example, they are building these navigation things based on GPS, and now they
Hmm.
want to move away from GPS because underwater there is no GPS.
Yep.
There is no GPS signal in the tunnel. There is no GPS signal somewhere where there is no satellite above. But you always have an Earth magnet field, and if you know the Earth magnet field strength and orientation, in principle, you know where you are. So but you need to have really ultra precise
Right.
measurements. So this is what is just coming up, or we can use it for detecting um, unobtrusive EEG waves or heart waves. So if
Yep.
you have a cap that is not looking like you're working on a concert as a clown, but you just have an unobtrusive way to measure your EEG or whatever signals, very weak magnetic signals. That is a strength. So
Yeah.
this is the sensor part.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, let's on that note, let's
Mm,
sort of take a brief segue to QTech, which is
mhm,
the Quantum Technology Application Consortium, which you're a part of, which brought together, I think, 14 of the
mhm,
largest companies to sort of one craft the German government's quantum technology action plan,
mhm,
and then I know, again, there's a it's an extensive plan, but there's also a paper that this one was in Springer Quantum Technology, November
mhm.
2021, Industry Quantum Computing Applications, where you, along with folks from like
Many other people.
BASF and Beringer and
Yeah, yeah, many. Yeah,
Volkswagen and talking about all possibilities.
yeah.
There's segments in there, obviously, on material sciences, which pharma
Mhm,
falls under, and then there's a
mhm,
whole section
mhm.
on production logistics.
Yeah.
Talk about QTech. Talk about, I mean, obviously, I guess it's sort of a rising tide at this point, lifting all the boats, because clearly, whatever BSF learns in the chemical domain, sort of relevant to you guys, and
Yes. Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
VW learned something for battery production. But take us to this period, because I think this is also kind of important in
It
sort of
was.
the big
This
picture of
is.
what you're doing.
It's a really good point. I think this was started back then when we still had Merkel as chancellor, because we wanted to identify German sovereignty and blah blah blah.
Yeah,
And then we were always networking cross companies. So we talked to our friends at Infineon, we talked to our friends at Boehringer. I mean, we had even, I mean, we just talked to each other. And then as a sudden, there was apparently a call from Merkel to Infineon and said we should do this. And then the bosses talked to each other. And then our boss, Kai Beckmann, came to us and say, should we do this? And said, oh, what a good idea. So finally, we prepared from both sides up. So we were ready to say, yeah, yeah, sure, let's talk to Andreas and from Infineon. And then it took quite some significant time to come from, yes, let's do something together to a operational structure. So I think we had a lot of lawyers working out the structure for IP, et cetera, et cetera. But in the end, we started with this QTAC, and the ambition was let's share our resource because every company has maybe 2 FTEs who have the capacity to work part of their time on quantum computing and stuff. And if you're just 2 people, it doesn't work. And also, I think coming back to this industry quantum computing applications, it was back the time where picking up to the early discussion, what can you do with that stuff?
yeah,
And then we said, okay, there is D-Wave and optimization problems. So you can calculate the traveling salesperson eventually using what have you
sure.
algorithm. And then this runs maybe quicker on this algorithm or the other algorithm. So we try to classify not only company specific, but classes of problems. So optimization, machine learning, material simulations, these kinds. And then said, okay, who is interested in that? Raising their hand. And okay, can we build working groups? So we have had a bit of an evolution back then, but we had a working group doing optimization. We had a working group doing quantum machine learning. Maybe we can talk a bit later on that. And then we had another group doing chemistry material simulations. And these algorithms, they are quite specific. But then we just said, okay, this makes sense. So, dear industry partners, let's build a group and position ourselves to say the QTalk. We are interested in these kinds of topics. This means for startups who are going to develop algorithms, it's just much more attractive to go to a team of 5 companies or 7 companies, because then they have 7 customers instead of just working this one here and this one here and this one. So that was the idea to really, yeah, solve practical things. So it's called application consortium. And in the end, as you mentioned, so it's the colleagues just don't care. They say, where can I buy it? Who is hosting it? When I kind of press a button, it's just too expensive, make it cheaper, blah, blah, blah. And of course, somebody needs to identify useful applications and build useful applications. And then there is nobody who's building the applications. So, for example, our friends from Boehringer, they are deep into developing the algorithms themselves.
Yeah.
They're quite good about that. And then there are others who are more saying, let's partner with, I don't know, the other guys. And we develop the proposal ourselves, and then we play directly with hardware providers and do our benchmarking ourselves. B&W is quite good also in that. Yeah, and then we had this publication because we said it's just worthwhile putting out and say what happens if the industry is coming together and thinking on what problems they have in common. So this was apparently relatively good. I don't know. I think we have 3,000 citations or what. So it's the best cited paper ever I have.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we had also support from Accenture back then, who was structuring this and setting up an infrastructure because I didn't speak Python. And then we just say, okay, you're going to pip install VS Code, and we have this in AWS and backend and little. I said, what? And then we really had workshops together. So of course, on the other hand, we had professional programmers from these companies who are, I mean, professional developers, but they had no clue on applications. So it was bringing really different people together and then going from there. And I mean, for the just to recap it. So this paper was applications, also quantum computing applications, and we really structured it, as you mentioned, along these classes to get a bit of guidance. And now, I mean, if you see what happened in the last 4 years, it's really dramatic because there is now industries and people who work on this and conferences just dedicated to one sub topic, and it's really moving forward. Meanwhile, I think we have people like IBM, for example, or companies like IBM, they have now built own functions just to address these classes, and we see a lot of mega mergers and so on. And so this was one thing. And on the other hand, in QTAC, we have a second stream still active, which was looking more at the infrastructure side, so the physics of a qubit, because so we call ourselves the system stream, I think. And the point is that you have different ways to do a qubit. So you have either natural things like a neutral atom or ions or whatever. And then you have synthetic qubits like transition junctions, so what IBM, for example, is doing. So you have an electronic current, which is working left or right. And then you can switch the direction of the current, and this is then the 0 or 1 of your qubit. And then you can excite these, so you need to build huge machinery, which is quick, but error prone. On the other hand, you have these super stable neutral atoms, or even more stable, the ions. You can work also with them, but it's super slow. And then, but they are very well connected. So for example, you need to imagine that these superconducting qubits, they are located on a grid. And if I want to have the qubit on this end talking to the qubit on the other hand, I have to do a lot of logical swaps because I just can't move it because it's fixed. And so entangled. So if I entangle atom 1 with atom 100, I need to do some computational steps, which is in principle good. But if I have error-prone computations, the time it lands here, it's maybe already noise. And on the other hand, I have these physical qubits where I can say, okay, entangle this one and entangle the other one. So I shuttle it around physically, entangle it, and shuttle it back, which takes time. And but it's stable. And then we were thinking, okay, can you identify these classes that we identified? Is there something that we say, if you're working on this type of algorithm, you need many, many, many entangled, but not so deep. So rather go for the entanglement first and then optimize your stuff. So maybe better to go for ion or neutral atoms. Or if you do something quick and you need long things, but only local interactions, then maybe go for the other one. So this was the idea. It's tough. We worked on two papers, I think, have been published. So one is really published and the other one is still on the archive. I don't recall actually. So we worked on the differences, as I said, between these ions, so ion Q, continuum, AQT, the neutral atoms, Q era Pascal, inflection and stuff, and photons is in the pipe. So there's another paradigm which is completely different, which is photonic quantum computing, and they work with photons. And because photons don't interact, because otherwise you would not just, I mean, the photons don't interact. You can't just bend a light with another light, so they just cross.
Right.
And by this, it's quite of complicated to modify photons' path, but you can count photons. So they have a complete different paradigm. So we were thinking, is this also worth investigating? Yes, it is, but it's very tough to understand because it comes with complete novel things. And this was what we are currently doing in QTAC, and then trying to help the other guys out. And this started with good intention, but I think meanwhile the technical maturity is so far that we have a bit of a problem in capacity just to follow up because this goes so quick.
And
Does it
just for
help?
the
Yeah.
for the audience sake, I mean, there's a series of papers that Thomas is talking about, and these are also in quantum technology. Springer, these are neutral atom quantum computing hardware, performance and end user perspectives, and ion-based quantum computing hardware. And again, in these papers, I got to things about qubit native gate sets and trap architectures and all that stuff. And then I just
you
fell
read
asleep.
this? Oh, cool.
Well, I read a couple of words and I realized this is above my pay grade. But nonetheless, I guess the point with these papers, and we'll link to this as well in the bio of the show, some very intricate technology structures. I tell a funny story that one of the past episodes I did was is with the folks from NTT over in Japan, and they were talking about their quantum icing machines. And I was sitting there thinking that they're making icing for cake. I didn't know what the
icing for cake. Yes.
I was like, that sounds great. I'll have one of those. But whatever. So it's a little silly story there. But you mentioned before quantum machine learning, and you also mentioned the book. So the book's called Computational Drug Discovery. You write chapter 26, which is entitled The Quantum Computing
You're
Paradigm.
informed. I mean, I'm impressed. You know me better than myself.
I'm trying to hang with you there. But so in this chapter, you talk about hey, AI's got their chat GPT moment. We need something in the quantum computing realm. It's not here yet, but and then you go into the theme of quantum machine learning. I think this is important time for again, because we've done a decent amount of AI / drug discovery shows that hey, I'm going to push this button and pop out an interesting drug structure. But I think it's important for the audience to understand that there's discrete differences between sort of what the AI folks are doing and looking at millions of molecules and something to do with this is a good structure here for binding with certain protein, with what the quantum folks are going to come up with and saying, okay, once we have that molecule, we now need to go deep and all the molecular interactions and to simulate the different quantum states and all that stuff. So talk about what quantum machine learning means to you, and again, sort of where these areas diverge and where they're coming together, and take us down that path.
So how long do we have now?
So 4 hours.
I think there is two different flavors to this quantum machine learning, and it's getting hot. So there is even now conferences, or there are whole conferences for several days, conferences with hundreds and thousands of people just talking nothing about the convergence of quantum computing and AI. And there are really hot pros and cons of what we should do with it. In principle, I like to discriminate between two things. So the one thing is we use AI itself for quantum computing. This means we take quantum computer data like statistical errors and control sequences, etc., and we feed this into our super deep train, whatever GPU-based NVIDIA big machines to learn error correction to help speed up quantum computing itself. So this is AI for quantum computing. And then we have the other part, which is a bit more controversial, but there is hope and hype. So let's boil it down for quantum for AI. And here the idea is to use the capability of the quantum, which means 1 qubit can have 2 states. I entangle 2 qubits, it's 2 by 2. I entangle 3 qubits, it's 2 by 2 by 2. So it's exponential potential to encode information. This means with 10 qubits, we could do 1,000 different encodings. And then the idea is, we should be able to do something here. And the devil is in the details. So there is one thing where we try to use a hybrid model. So you need to encode your data. I think that's the biggest challenge, to find ways to encode your data, because if we talk about deep learning, we have just straightforward bits, and we have a meaning for these bits. But for quantum computers, we just need to know which qubit should have which meaning. So I think this is the first thing. And then we need to do something with a qubit. So typically you mentioned this gate-based algorithms. So you have a qubit and you rotate it, and depending on the rotation where it points to, I connect the other thing. So I'm building a relatively grid, and these rotations, they are, if you do a lot of them, make an algorithm, and then poof, you measure, and then you measure the outcome, and then you say, okay, what is it? You train your algorithm. So it's like classical machine learning. So instead of neural networks, I have a quantum neural network. And this is super slow. But in the end, I'm using the classical gradient descent mechanism to train my variational circuits. And the hope is that if I do this cleverly, I can train with less data the machine better and less steps. So I can learn not only big data, but I can learn small data. And the challenge is that there is no best practice. So it's really an art. So people construct these circuits, they feed in their data and say, oh, it's learning better. And then there was a bit of a blow to the community, I think last year or 2 years ago, when one of the brilliant brains, Maria Schuld, she's kind of so if she says this is wrong, then everybody better listens. And then she came up and did the meta-analysis and said, guys, the community published 100 papers, and their algorithms, we reproduced them, we took out the entanglement, and still producing the same results, so we have an issue here. This means we have apparently found, or authors have found, classes where just by the sake of using quantum instead of normal, without using the quantum component itself, you get better results. And we have no clue why this is. And this is something we are going to explore, if there is something more to the use of hyperdimensionalization. So you just take your data, you blow it up by using quantum, and then you do classical machine learning on top of it. So it's linear regression. So this is what quantum machine learning is. I mean, it's really a dance, and not many people are a fan of it. The other idea is that you can, when we published a paper on that you can use it to do better generic. So you use it as generative adversarial networks. So you have a quantum generator, which is intrinsic random. So you don't need an external noise source. So you can just go with your thing, and then you just train it and reproduce it. So it seems that it can learn complex probability distributions that are hard to learn classically, less bad than classical machines, but nobody knows why. And this is really, I mean, if nobody knows why, it's a heuristic, and then it's getting a bit esoteric. So I think it's really hard to argument on that.
Got it. Let's go now to the future a bit. Not that we've been hanging out in topics that are far, over the horizon, but nonetheless, I mean, when sort of the wavelength or whatever collapses, and we have our final formal ion trap icing quantum computer set up right here, everything's working fine. We've ironed out all details. Take us to where we're going. I mean, obviously, when I go into my machine learning system over here, this ChatGPT thing, it starts spitting out stuff all about quantum magnetoencephalography as a way to, sort of specifically see how this CNS targeted drug that I took for glioblastoma is working. It goes into really cool things about quantum sensors embedded in these nanoprobes that can say, hey, this cell is cancerous, this one is not. Take us to the future. I mean, what excites you? What applications do you personally want to see developed first once this thing is fully operational? Take us to the future.
Yeah, I think this is a good question, and maybe first. So why did we set up this task force? So it was a bullshit filter, because if you read Yeah, every consultancy I know of, and I know them all, and they know me, so they always say, "Yeah, we can do better drugs." I say, "Whoa, who told you?" He said, "Oh, well, why not?" He said, "Yes, but I mean," and the point is really putting quantum just in front doesn't help. And classical computation is super good. We have a lot of things that work better with classical computer. We have real lab experiments that are also producing real data, and then I mean extending to quantum computing and sensing. It's really worthwhile to say, is there, as I mentioned, is there something like the Laola somewhere in cancer? So is there a Laola cancer? I don't know. I mean, I'm making up stuff, so don't quote me later. But if is there a Laola type of cancer that you say if it's turning left, I give you component X. If it's turning right, I give you component Z, drug X, drug Z. If there would be a way to describe the world like this, then we can say, okay, now let's assume this is the fact. Let's do classical simulation, classical experiments, look where we could add quantum on top of it, build a construct, build something, and then we have additional value. So I think this is one thing in the future where we can say, do we have a paradigm shift in describing our problems? So maybe cancer is not well described because it's just what I don't know. So definitely cancer is tough. So maybe there are ways to describe your systems differently. And then you mentioned sensors. I think the interesting part is really um, in principle, quantum algorithms should be better with quantum data. Just the question is where do we have quantum data, and do quantum sensors produce quantum data, or do they produce classical data? That's the other question. So, but I think in the end, I'm also hosting a podcast, and there's a quantum dragon, and I interviewed the quantum dragon, and the quantum dragon says, I want to have quantum sensors doing quantum computers with quantum networks and quantum what have you. And I think this is maybe the future that we identify where we really have a sweet spot
Mhm.
that we say there is a field that we can describe systems in a novel way. Just to give you one idea that I'm currently working on with the support of federal funding, because without federal funding, I'm not sure that Merck would support this, but I have my own source. I have my own funding. Um, so um, I'm looking at a method which is called reservoir computing. So it's another very old method, but it's not mm, very well known. And what instead of
Okay.
all this big data thing and where you train your network,
Hmm.
you just say, I have a network, I have the input, I observe the output, and I just do the correlation. So, but I don't train the network. I know that it's always behaving the same way. So this is the reservoir. It's very complex. It's very good at analyzing time series or what have you, or analyzing weather prediction. So it's very good in weather prediction, for example. But it's quite tough to build these machines. And then there is the idea, I think that came up from KGaA and from IBM or whoever, that you can use quantum systems to make controllable reservoirs. So this is what we are just working on. And the use case I have run is that we are also working in parallel to use the sound of the voice or the musicality of the voice
Hmm.
as a biomarker. So, and this is, so we have two things. So one of thing, we have a strategic partnership with Sonde, but we're not working this path where they are more into obtrusive discussion, but we're working with another partner. And they use this in a clinical setting to detect depression scores or
Mm.
the tendency to suicide or ADHS, etc. And what they want to do, or what they did with other partners, other industry partners, they said the current way to treat quality of life is a complex topic in itself. So quality
Sure.
of life. So what is quality of life? Financial status, stress at home,
Hmm.
health. So they were looking at these clinical um, parameters where, as a depression score, you come there and then you sit with your doctor, you cross some number. How do you feel today on a scale of 1 to 10? So you cross these things. which is standard of care, but maybe outdated. So I'm not making friends now, but this is what is the case. So a lot of these methods that are still used in medicine are a bit outdated, and therefore you need some objective measure. So ideally, you have the individual baseline of the voice. Then you get sick. Then you see, oh, I mean, if you talk to your mother, she definitely knows what's up. And they say, oh, what happened? Oh, what happened? And these things are then fed into a classical machine, and it spits out 1,000 numbers. And based on this qualifies the characteristic of the voice. They have the IP on. I know in principle what it is. But then we said, can we take this as a disease progression monitor? I have had the idea to use this as a detector for MS, early on MS, because to detect multiple sclerosis, you should hear it because it's a muscular disease. You have an early onset, so people get blurry vision and people get a bit of a different modified voice. Or for other diseases like myasthenia gravis, which is a rare disease. So patients who suffer from this sound like drunk, and you just don't know if they are drunk or if they have this disease.
Yeah.
And we're working on this. We're not the only ones working on this, but we have the idea that in principle you could help doctors better diagnose because there's a difference if you are drunk or if you have MG.
Right.
And if we would be able to deploy this, just the wish to the universe, I'm not speaking for the company plans, it's my individual vision. I think there's a lot of room. And then the challenge is always 100 patients, big data, forget it. And therefore, this is the idea why we look at different methods. So whatever helps, is it classical reservoir, is it quantum, what have you. So I think we're just exploring, stretching the paradigm here, and look what makes sense. So I think this is where I see also the future more into personalized medicine or rare disease detection support or what have you. So I think that's this is it.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I mean, you are out there. I know Quantum France just happened back in June.
Yes.
Where you're talking about some of these things, but there's Quantum Tech 2025 coming up, I think, in a couple months. Your talk there, will pharma and life sciences be the first industry to see true quantum advantage? And again, talking about some of what you were just mentioning in terms of personalized medicine. What else is coming up? What else should we know about? I mean, it could be more than quantum. I know your group does beyond quantum as well, but what's coming up for the rest of the year? What other things should we know about while we have you today? And then if there's any scoop or any quick non-stealthy stuff that's happening in your group that you want to mention.
I mean,
I don't know what's beyond quantum, but I'm sure there's other cool things.
I can tell you now. So I mean, but as you mentioned, France Quantum. So this is, I think, sometimes people put you in the places where you are not have planned to be there. So my family has before the official Amitié Franco-Allemande from Adenauer de Gaulle, so quite back, they had so my father was sent from his father to the enemy in France to unite Europe, because he said, I don't want to have this. So we are neighbors. We should behave. So, and then we have this family friendship now since many years, and now comes a call from, I don't know who was it. So it was the embassy who said, we're having this. Are you going to join us and speak for German industry? So why not? Yeah, sure. And then, I mean, we had really exchanged on technology, on sensors. We had Manfred Rieck from Deutsche Bahn, who is very much into post-quantum security topics. So we also have this on the radar, because everybody is afraid that people with quantum computer can hack into their systems, even worse than they can now. So this is post-quantum. So we have a guy who's working on this, and he will also be at the conference, Martin. And but post-quantum is not quantum. It's just mathematics. So it's security topics, but the threat is quantum, but the solution is not quantum. So it's making secure against quantum. And also on this French thing, so I discovered that, for example, EDF, so Énergie de France, they also work on reservoir computing. And so what I'm planning So keep your fingers crossed. But maybe we have a session on this quantum tech in late September, early October in Rotterdam. We have one session eventually on quantum reservoir and reservoir computing, who's dealing what. So we're just trying to figure out what it makes sense, because it's a bit like a Kutak moment where you say there are methods. Now let's just share. So those guys work on energy time series prediction, because you no longer have these big machines that turn their wheels. So you have a lot of solar cells, and that it changes relatively quickly. And I think few months back we saw what happens if they don't synchronize well. Boof, the whole grid in Spain went down. And of course they want to have better means to predict this. And apparently classical analysis, even if you spend all your money on GPUs, doesn't work, because just the problem is too complex. So they are looking at, as I said, as flexible ways to learn better with not all data, but with less data, because then you can do the calculations quicker. So all these kinds of exchanges. So I think I'm considering myself as an icebreaker, or I mean, in the sense of opening path for others to work on. So we throw topics in the air, and then if somebody wants to join, they just walk along. Or bridge builder. So on a personal mission, as you just what's coming up, we will have 1 million listeners. Not just kidding. I think there is a kind of a time that people who should know each other and don't know each other talk to each other, like you do with your podcast. I mean, you bring just every different disciplines. Now you have me on the quantum show. You had Dean Radin talking about what have you. You had, I mean, so you have right, wide, and deep. And I'm just doing this also to bring the let's say, I call it entangled health, because I think that the health itself is so complex that we need everyone who thinks he or she has a method to contribute, that people get better. So let's bring them together. So this is my personal mission. And yeah, else I think we are hoping. I'm just jumping out of another meeting where we're preparing the final data to get the grant. So this is what's coming up, because I think it's good to have grants to stay networked also with the industry, but also get a bit of recognition, and also give back to the country also, to say Germany donates this amount of money. So is somebody able to make something with it? So we compete. I guess we are in a good position to get a small grant for the next 3 years just to continue on this topic. Because I mean, as I mentioned in the beginning, Merck is doing other stuff. Yeah, so Merck KGaA Darmstadt, Germany, is doing other stuff.
Right.
And this is on top. So yeah.
No, it's again, it's I call it the bleeding edge, just because
Bleeding.
coming back to the Nina Siragusa episode,
Yes.
this principle of convergence, and these
Yes.
fields that didn't work together. Well, maybe we thought they would work together a couple of decades ago, but now here we are, and we're getting them to work together. And even this show has been rather, we started off with frog toes, and we ended up
Yeah, sure.
with quantum encryption and all sorts of other fun things. But no, it's very impressive, Thomas. And just for the audience, again, just as a plug for you, your show is the Entangled Health podcast, correct? Is that the
Yeah, it's quite
Okay.
new, so it's quite fresh. So I had this moment to say I'm under busy.
No, I think
Follow
it's
your
awesome.
passion. I mean,
Yeah.
follow your passion, and this is a bit of a hobby. But I mean, I can't hide that I'm within this company, so we always have this disclaimer that we are not speaking for the industry, blah blah.
Sure.
But I have a lot of people. I think they're fascinating people. I just want to give a frame. I'm not sure if I'm the best qualified to do so, but let's start. And maybe because you mentioned it, we get now at least one listener more, I hope.
Oh,
We
hey,
take it from there. Yeah. Yeah.
hey, absolutely, absolutely. I think what you're doing there in terms of bringing quantum and AI and biotech, and I think that's outstanding. And again, one of the reasons I've been pushing so hard to get you on this show. So I'm excited. I
Hmm.
know it's we still got a bit of a way to go, but you've been bringing you've taken us from when there was nothing into a really unique
Sure.
time now in
Yeah.
2025, where some really fascinating things are going to be transpiring. But I'm very excited for your group. And just wish you the best with this as you continue to move it all forward in the organization. Final messages while we have you today. Anything that I missed
Yeah,
that you want
I
to talk
want
about,
to
please?
I want to really reuse the opportunity to thank all the sponsors because I'm doing this on top of our job, and normally I'm doing AI governance. I'm being paid for that. But that Thomas Ehmer is working on quantum whatever, so I have the intellectual and not only intellectual but passion of our senior leaders and senior executive leaders, CIO Alessandro. He's is a fantastic. So I think it's really I am really grateful that I can do that because they could just say different. They just say no, shut up, go in line, but they don't. And this luckily, so I hope this doesn't change after this call. But this is really something I guess it's really important to my statement is if you put the ego behind, things doors open. And I try to do that, and every time I try to put the ego in front, things crash. So that's maybe my my statement. So I hope I can continue with just being of service.
Um, for everybody out there that is going to be listening to this episode of our show across the various podcast networks, or who will be watching on the YouTube channel, again, you've been spending time with Dr. Thomas Ehmer, um, AI Governance and Innovation Incubator and co-founder of the Quantum Interest Group, Merck KGaA Darmstadt, Germany. Again, doing really amazing things to bridge the gap between fascinating emerging technologies and thinking about the importance of real world industry applications. Thomas, again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us for quite a while today about everything that you've been up to and have going on. Thank you for everything you do to champion these technologies and move them forward. And as we say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow via the type of work that you do and you think about. It's really impressive. Very impressive.
Thanks.
Great having you.